Hey guys, today I'm going to be showing you a couple different ways on how I can tomatoes. Here's a sampling of different supplies that I use or things that I have around while I'm processing. I have two different flats of tomatoes, some just kind of hothouse slicers, and some Roma paste tomatoes. I'll be using a food mill and then a basic funnel, rim measure, and canning tongs. Here's a sampling of how I process tomatoes, and this is going to be the same technique is going to be used for the different ways that I'm showing you on how I can tomatoes. This is called coring and scoring. Get rid of all the yucky spots that you find in your tomatoes for canning to ensure no contamination within your jars. So the process that I'm showing you here, the coring is coring and scoring. You know that core has really tough parts, so we don't want that in our canned tomatoes. And then the scoring is just the process of helping loosen the skin as you process for blanching and for freezer blanching. I don't know what that's called. Essentially putting bags of tomatoes in the freezer and letting them to freeze and defrost. And when it defrosts, kind of acts as the same kind of process of blanching. Is you're going to release tons of water, which makes it easier to can. So this is the blanching process. Just putting your tomatoes in simmering or boiling water. Let them sit there for about 3 minutes. And that'll help loosen the skin without cooking your tomato. Next, you'll put them in cold water. A lot of recipes or methods will tell you to put your tomatoes after blanching into icy water. I feel like that's an extra step that you don't really need to do when you're wasting a lot of ice in this process. So what I do is I just, after each blanch, I empty the sink and refill it with cold water, or if I feel like the water is getting too warm while the tomatoes are sitting in it, I'll just I'll start to drain and add it in cold water. But you'll see here that to the skin, how loose the skins are, they peel right off, and so it's easier to just get that off your tomatoes. In this process, instead of just one by one peeling tomatoes or whatever, I like to put them through this food mill, and it does the peeling and de-seeding for me, and it just makes processing a whole lot faster. And don't throw away those skins, because we can make tomato powder out of that. And you'll see that in another video I have posted. It's important when you're processing or canning tomatoes to add salt. Well, maybe not necessarily not salt, but this lemon juice is or citric acid to help preserve your tomatoes. Since we do this because we don't know how much acid is in each tomato, and this just helps ensure that your tomato is preserved properly. I personally like to use both lemon and salt. That way the tomatoes are already ready to go for cooking time. Right now I'm getting these jars, the blue and pink jars, ready for diced tomatoes, which I'm about to show you. I kind of jump all over the place in this video, showing you 3 different processes for canning tomatoes. And so again, we're going to core that tomato. The Romas don't have a big core, so I just kind of slice the top off to get rid of it before I start dicing. Whoops, couldn't find the hole. I know this is wasteful, but for whatever reason, I don't like to use the ends of the tomatoes. I'm sure there's nothing wrong with them, and it's still just tomato, but my brain tells me not to use them. It's a weird personal thing. But if you like to use ends, go right ahead and do so. Okay, so we're going to make sure that we have the proper amount of headspace. I think it's 2/3 inch. I don't remember off the top of my head. But follow your canning recipes that you have, and you'll make sure that you process properly and that you're not losing any of your liquids or have siphoning happening, and that you ensure a proper seal. And here we are just topping off to make sure I meet that headspace requirement before moving on. Oh, I forgot I was recording and I accidentally blocked this process. And there it is, proper headspace. Okay, now you see the process of filling a whole can diced in high speed. You're going to see two different things I do that you didn't see on the last jar. You're going to need to press down the tomatoes and squeeze out whatever juices that they have inside of them to create the liquid inside of your jar. Also, you're going to see me debubbling to make sure I move out any air that might be trapped in there, and just push it down, debubble, push it down again, and then keep filling the space. And you'll do this with each of your jars to ensure that there's no air left or trapped in your jars, and that all of the tomatoes are submerged in their own liquids. Clean the lids or the rims before you add the lid. And then I'm cold packing these tomatoes, and what that means is that when I put them in the pot for canning, the water bath canning, that the water inside the canner is going to start off cold as well, and the jars will come up to temperature right alongside or right with the water, so that we don't risk cracking any of our jars. And then while those are getting processed, I'm showing you, backtrack. All this time that I've been dicing and filling those jars, I was boiling the previously shown tomatoes that I ran through the food mill. They've been reducing in water and thickening up, and so now I'm filling those jars, and then I'm going to be processing those. This method, like, in order to get all the water out that you want, you'd have to like boil them all day. So I usually leave them just a little runny. And that's why this is not my favorite method of canning tomatoes. The next one I show you is the one that I prefer the most. But I mean, tomato is tomato, and it's still gonna work in my cooking, so it's all good. I still got canned tomatoes out of this, and I love it anyways. So right here, I realized that I had extra space for another jar, and while that jar that I just prepared is not hot, and it's not heated up to meet it's not at the same temperature as the water. So I gambled, and I ran the risk of possibly cracking my jar. So I don't technically recommend doing that, but in this case it worked out, and I was able to use the jar just fine. So these will water bath can for 10 minutes. Here I am just lowering the temperature just a bit so that it can continue to boil but not be jumping out of the pot. And we'll set the timer for 10 minutes. And when it's done, turn the heat off, take the lid off, set it aside, and let that cool down a little bit before we take them out. I remembered I had just used those burners, and I didn't want to risk cracking my lid, so I just moved it over here. Okay, 5 minutes that they'll sit and cool, and the reason for this is so that when we pull the jars out, we don't want the temperature to be so drastic and shock the jars, and then you risk losing all the liquids, and they siphon. It's just all bad. So we just let it run 5 minutes, and then we can start pulling them out. And this is after processing, I think it was two batches of tomato sauce. And then here's the method I like to do. I core and score all these tomatoes, and they're in freezer bags. I think I ended up with like 16 bags of tomatoes, cored and scored. Then I take them over to our chest freezer and let them freeze overnight. Okay, once they're done, the next day I leave them out. When I went to work, I just took them out and let them defrost. What that does, when you freeze tomatoes, like the cellular structure of the tomatoes expands and then bursts, and so all the water that's stored inside the tomato is released from its cells, and that just helps with the process. See this bag, how it's full of its own juices. And I just take each tomato and kind of give it a little squeeze to release any extra that is still like just inside the tomato. That one just completely came apart. And And the processing time for these in the boil, during while you boil them, is so much shorter, and also you get a thicker sauce out of them. So here's what I came up with at the end of all the processing: the diced tomatoes and the 2 separate batches of tomato sauce that I made. There it is.